They said I wasn't good enough for their precious son. His mother threw champagne in my face at their wedding reception. But when the most powerful woman in the city walked up and called me daughter-in-law in front of everyone, their faces went white. Here's how it happened. If you've ever been made to feel small by people who think money makes them better than you, this story will give you chills. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell because you won't believe how this ends. Now, let me tell you about the night that changed everything. Hi, I'm Rebecca, and 6 months ago I thought my life was falling apart. But sometimes, what feels like your worst moment is actually setting you up for your greatest triumph. Let me take you back to where it all began. I work at Premium Motors downtown, one of those fancy car showrooms with marble floors and crystal chandeliers. I've been there for 4 years, and I'm actually pretty good at what I do. I know every detail about luxury cars, from engine specifications to leather seat options. It's honest work, and I take pride in helping people find their dream car. But to some people, that apparently wasn't enough. For 3 years, I was dating Jake Sterling. Jake was everything you'd expect from old money. Tall, handsome, charming when he wanted to be. We met at a coffee shop near my work, and for a while, I thought we had something real. He'd pick me up after my shifts, we'd go to dinner, and he seemed genuinely interested in my life. But there was always this shadow hanging over us. His family. The Sterlings weren't just wealthy, they were that kind of established rich where money had been in the family for generations. Jake's father, William, owned several businesses across the state, and his mother, Patricia made it her personal mission to remind everyone of their social status. From the moment Jake introduced me to them, I could feel her disapproval radiating like cold air from an open freezer. "So, Rebecca," she'd say with that fake smile, "you work with cars. Not selling cars, not helping customers. Working with cars, like I was some kind of mechanic covered in grease." And Jake would just sit there, never defending me, never correcting her tone. That should have been my first red flag. The comments got worse over time. At family dinners, she'd make little remarks about people knowing their place in society. She'd talk about Jake's future, his career prospects, always making sure I understood that someone like me didn't fit into those plans. "We need to think about image," she'd say. "The Sterling name means something in this city." But the breaking point came 6 months ago. Jake and I were getting serious. At least I thought we were. We'd talked about moving in together, maybe even engagement. I was naive enough to believe love could overcome class differences. How wrong I was. Patricia called Jake to her house one evening for what she called a family discussion. I wasn't invited, of course. When Jake came to my apartment later that night, his face was pale and his hands were shaking. He couldn't even look me in the eyes. "Rebecca, we need to talk," he said, and those words hit me like a punch to the stomach. He sat on my couch, the same couch where we'd watched movies and planned our future, and delivered the blow that would change everything. My family thinks, this relationship isn't going anywhere." He was stumbling over his words, clearly rehearsing what Patricia had told him to say. "You're a wonderful person, but we come from different worlds. My inheritance, my future with the family business, it all depends on making the right choices." I stared at him, waiting for him to say he'd chosen me, that he'd fight for us. Instead, he kept talking about expectations and responsibilities and how he couldn't disappoint his family. The boy I'd loved for 3 years was choosing money over me, and he didn't even have the courage to own that decision. "So that's it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. 3 years, and you're throwing it all away because your mother doesn't approve of my job?" He finally looked at me then, and I saw something in his eyes that made me realize I'd never really known him at all. There was relief there. Relief that he wouldn't have to stand up to his family. Relief that he could take the easy path. "I'm sorry, Rebecca. This is just how it has to be." After he left, I cried for 3 days straight. Then I got angry. Then I got determined. I threw myself into work like never before. I studied every new car model, learned about market trends, and pushed myself to be the best salesperson at Premium Motors. If they wanted to judge me for my job, then I'd excel at it beyond their wildest imagination. The months passed, and slowly I started to heal. I made new friends, took up hobbies I'd neglected during my relationship with Jake. I even started dating again, well, sort of. There was this one customer who came into the showroom about 3 months after the breakup. Adrian was looking for a specific luxury sedan, and something about his genuine kindness and the way he treated me with respect made those conversations stretch longer than they needed to. But that's getting ahead of myself. The story I really need to tell you happened just 2 weeks ago when an elegant cream envelope appeared in my mailbox. My heart sank when I saw the return address, Sterling Manor. Inside was a wedding invitation printed on the most expensive cardstock money could buy. Mr. and Mrs. William Sterling request your presence at the marriage of their son Jake Sterling to Miss Sophia Hamilton. The date was set for the following Saturday at their family estate. I sat on my kitchen floor holding that invitation, feeling all the old wounds tear open again. Why would they invite me? Was this Patricia's way of twisting the knife, showing me what Jake had chosen instead of me? Sophia Hamilton. I'd heard of her family. They were exactly the kind of people the Sterlings would approve of, with the right bloodline and the right bank account. My first instinct was to throw the invitation away and pretend it never happened, but then something inside me rebelled. I'd spent 6 months healing, growing, becoming stronger. I wasn't going to let fear keep me away. I would go to this wedding, not to cause drama or win Jake back, but to prove to myself that I was over him. I would show up looking absolutely stunning, with my head held high, and let them see that Rebecca the car salesperson was doing just fine without them. I spent my entire sales commission from that month on the perfect dress, a gorgeous red number that made me feel confident and beautiful. I got my hair done, my nails perfected, and when I looked in the mirror the morning of the wedding, I saw a woman who had been through hell and come out stronger. The Sterling estate was even more impressive than I remembered, decorated with thousands of white roses and fairy lights that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Luxury cars filled the circular driveway, Mercedes, BMWs, a few Porsches. I parked my modest sedan between a Bentley and a Tesla, feeling like I was already out of place. Walking through the front entrance, I was greeted by the soft sound of classical music and the gentle hum of wealthy conversation. Everyone looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine, the women in designer gowns, the men in perfectly tailored suits. I recognized some faces from the country club events Jake used to drag me to, and I could feel their curious stares as I made my way to the ceremony area. The wedding itself was beautiful, I have to admit. Jake looked handsome in his tuxedo, and Sophia was absolutely radiant in a dress that probably cost more than my car. They exchanged vows in the Sterling family garden, surrounded by their perfectly matched social circle. I sat in the back, trying to feel nothing, trying to convince myself that this was closure. But as I watched Jake promise to love and honor Sophia, all I could think about was how easily he'd thrown away our promises, how quickly he'd chosen comfort over courage, tradition over love. I realized then that I wasn't heartbroken anymore. I was disappointed. Disappointed that I'd wasted 3 years on someone so weak. After the ceremony, everyone moved to the ballroom for the reception. The Sterling ballroom was something out of a fairy tale: crystal chandeliers, marble floors, tables draped in silk and adorned with elaborate centerpieces. A string quartet played in one corner, while waiters circulated with champagne and gourmet appetizers. I found a quiet spot near the edge of the room, nursing a glass of wine and watching the celebration. Several people from Jake's old crowd approached me with that fake concern that wealthy people do so well. "Rebecca! What a surprise to see you here," said one of Jake's former colleagues, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "How brave of you to come. How are you managing?" "I'm doing very well, actually," I replied with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Work is going great. Life is good." "Oh, that's nice. Still selling cars, I assume?" The way she said it made my profession sound like some kind of shameful secret. These conversations happened over and over, people expressing surprise that I'd attended, asking about my job with barely concealed disdain, making it clear that they all knew the story of how Patricia had ended my relationship with Jake. I kept my composure, but inside, I was starting to question why I'd come. That's when Patricia Sterling made her entrance into my section of the ballroom. She approached with 3 of her closest friends, all women who shared her sense of superiority and her love of public humiliation. Patricia was wearing a stunning blue gown that probably cost more than I made in 6 months, and her jewelry caught the light from the chandeliers like she was wearing pieces of the sun itself. "Well, well," she said loud enough for half the ballroom to hear, "look who decided to grace us with her presence." "Rebecca, darling, what a surprise." The conversations around us quieted as people sensed drama approaching. I straightened my shoulders and met her gaze directly. "Hello, Patricia?" "Congratulations on Jake's wedding. It's a beautiful celebration." She laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "Oh, how generous of you to say so. Tell me, dear, what exactly brings you here tonight? Surely you have better things to do than attend the wedding of your ex-boyfriend?" Her friends tittered like a group of mean high school girls, and I could feel more eyes turning our way. My cheeks burned with embarrassment, but I kept my voice steady. I was invited. I thought it would be nice to wish Jake well. "How thoughtful," Patricia said, her voice getting louder and more theatrical. "Though I have to wonder if it's appropriate. After all, some people might get the wrong idea about your motivations for being here." One of her friends, a thin woman with sharp features, jumped in. "Patricia's right, dear. It does seem a bit desperate, doesn't it, coming to your ex-boyfriend's wedding? I felt like I was back in high school, being cornered by the popular girls who delighted in making others feel small. But I wasn't a teenager anymore, and I'd learned to stand up for myself. I'm here as a guest, just like everyone else," I said firmly. "I wanted to support Jake on his special day." Patricia's smile turned vicious. "Support? Oh, sweetheart, I think we both know what this is really about. You're here hoping to— what? Win him back? Show him what he's missing?" The crowd around us had grown, and I could see phones being discreetly raised to record whatever was about to happen. My heart was pounding, but I refused to back down. I'm here to wish him well and move on with my life. "Move on?" Patricia's voice was getting shriller. "With what life exactly? You're still working at that car dealership, aren't you? Still trying to convince people to buy things they can't afford? Some things never change, I suppose." Her friends laughed again, and I felt tears starting to burn behind my eyes. This was exactly what she wanted, to humiliate me in front of all these people, to make me run away crying so she could feel superior. "At least I work honestly for what I have," I said, my voice shaking slightly but still strong. Patricia's eyes flashed with anger. "Honestly? Oh, my dear girl, there's nothing honest about someone like you crashing a wedding where you clearly don't belong. You're embarrassing yourself, and frankly, you're embarrassing all of us." That's when she did it. Patricia Sterling, in her expensive blue gown with her perfectly styled hair, picked up her glass of champagne and threw it directly at my face. The cold liquid hit me like a slap, soaking the front of my beautiful red dress and dripping down my face. The ballroom went completely silent except for a few gasps and the sound of someone's phone camera clicking. I stood there, dripping and shocked, while Patricia looked at me with satisfaction. "There," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Now maybe you'll understand where you truly belong. Some people need to learn their place the hard way." I wiped champagne from my eyes, tasting the bitter bubbles on my lips. Every person in that ballroom was staring at me, some with shock, some with pity, and some with the cruel enjoyment that comes from watching someone else's public humiliation. I looked around for Jake, hoping that seeing his mother assault his former girlfriend might finally inspire him to grow a spine, but he was nowhere to be found. This was it. This was my lowest moment. Standing in a room full of people who considered themselves better than me, soaked in champagne, humiliated beyond belief. Patricia had won. She'd proven her point that I didn't belong in their world, that I was nothing more than a car salesperson who'd forgotten her place. I was about to turn and walk out, head down, dignity shattered, when I heard a commotion at the ballroom entrance. The massive double doors opened and a woman I'd never seen before walked in. But based on the immediate reaction of everyone around me, she was someone very important. The entire ballroom fell silent, not the shocked silence from my humiliation, but the reverent quiet that comes when someone with real power enters a room. She was probably in her 50s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and wearing a dress that made Patricia's expensive gown look like something from a discount store. But it wasn't just her clothes that commanded attention. It was the way she moved, the confidence in every step, the unmistakable aura of someone who owned whatever room she entered. Two men in dark suits flanked her, clearly security, and behind them walked a younger man who looked vaguely familiar. The woman surveyed the ballroom with sharp, intelligent eyes, and when her gaze landed on me, standing there dripping with champagne, her expression softened with what looked like concern. Then she did something that made my heart stop. She walked directly toward me, her heels clicking authoritatively on the marble floor, and everyone in the ballroom parted like the Red Sea to let her through. When she reached me, she opened her arms and pulled me into a warm, protective embrace that smelled like expensive perfume and genuine kindness. "Hello, my dear daughter-in-law," she said loud enough for the entire stunned ballroom to hear. The gasps that followed were audible throughout the room. I stared at her in complete confusion, my mind unable to process what was happening. Daughter-in-law? I'd never seen this woman before in my life. She held me at arm's length, her hands gentle on my shoulders, and looked at me with the kind of maternal warmth I'd never received from Patricia Sterling. "I'm so sorry I'm late, sweetheart." Traffic was terrible coming from the airport. She glanced at my champagne-soaked dress, and her expression hardened as she turned to look at Patricia. "What happened here?" Before I could answer, the young man who'd entered with her stepped forward, and suddenly everything clicked into place. It was Adrian, the customer from the showroom who'd been so kind to me over the past few months. But seeing him now in this context, I realized he was much more than just a friendly customer. "Rebecca," he said with a smile that made my heart skip, "I'd like you to meet my mother, Eleanor Blackwood." Eleanor Blackwood. Even in my shocked state, I recognized that name. Everyone in the city knew Eleanor Blackwood. She owned the largest automotive empire in the state, with dealerships, manufacturing plants, and investments that made the Sterling family fortune look like pocket change. "Your mother?" I whispered, still trying to understand what was happening. Eleanor smiled at me with genuine affection. "Adrian has told me so much about you, dear. He talks about you constantly, how intelligent you are, how well you know the automotive business, how kind and genuine you are. When he told me he was planning to propose, I insisted on meeting you immediately." "Propose?" My head was spinning. I looked at Adrian, this man I'd been getting to know over friendly conversations about car features and payment plans, and saw something in his eyes I'd been too cautious to recognize before: love. Adrian stepped closer and took my hands, not caring that they were sticky with champagne. "Rebecca, I've been trying to work up the courage to ask you this for weeks. I didn't want to rush things, especially knowing what you'd been through. But seeing you here tonight, seeing someone treat you with such disrespect..." He glanced meaningfully at Patricia, who was standing frozen in shock. "I can't wait another day." Right there in the Sterling ballroom, in front of hundreds of people including my ex-boyfriend and his new wife, Adrian dropped to one knee and pulled out a ring that made every piece of jewelry in the room look like costume pieces. "Rebecca, will you marry me?" The ballroom erupted in whispers and gasps, but all I could see was Adrian's face, full of hope and love and genuine respect. This man who'd seen me not as a car salesperson to look down on, but as someone worth knowing, worth loving, worth building a future with. "Yes," I whispered, then louder, "Yes." As he slipped the ring onto my finger, Eleanor began to clap, and gradually, the entire ballroom joined in. But I barely heard the applause because I was focused on Eleanor's face as she looked directly at Patricia Sterling. "Now then," Eleanor said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd built an empire from nothing, I believe someone owes my daughter-in-law an apology." Patricia's face had gone completely white. She was staring at Eleanor like she'd seen a ghost, probably calculating exactly how much more powerful the Blackwood family was than the Sterlings. "Mrs. Blackwood, I had no idea. I didn't realize—" Patricia stammered, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. "You didn't realize what?" Eleanor asked sharply. "That you were humiliating a guest at your son's wedding? That you were throwing champagne at a young woman who's done nothing but work hard and conduct herself with dignity? Or that you were insulting the future daughter-in-law of someone who could buy and sell your family business 3 times over?" The silence in the ballroom was deafening. Eleanor continued, her voice never raising but somehow filling every corner of the room. "Rebecca doesn't just sell cars anymore, Mrs. Sterling. She's going to help run our automotive empire. She's going to be my daughter-in-law, my business partner, and a member of one of the most successful families in this state. But even if she were still working at that dealership, she would deserve your respect. Good, honest work is nothing to be ashamed of." Patricia looked like she wanted to disappear into the marble floor. I sincerely apologize, Rebecca. I was completely out of line. Please forgive me." The apology was clearly forced, but seeing Patricia Sterling, the woman who'd made me feel worthless, who'd destroyed my relationship with her son, who'd just humiliated me in front of a room full of people, standing there having to beg for my forgiveness, was worth every tear I'd shed over the past 6 months. "Apology accepted," I said graciously, though we both knew I'd never forget this moment. Eleanor put her arm around my shoulders protectively. "I think it's time we left this party. We have wedding planning to do." As we turned to leave, I caught sight of Jake standing near the cake table, his face a mixture of shock, regret, and something that looked like longing. For just a moment, our eyes met across the room, and I saw him realize exactly what he'd thrown away when he'd chosen his mother's approval over our love. But I felt nothing for him anymore. No anger, no sadness, no regret. Just pity for a man who'd been too weak to fight for what mattered. Walking out of that ballroom with Eleanor and Adrian, I felt like I was stepping into a completely new life. The same people who'd watched Patricia humiliate me were now watching me leave with the most powerful family in the city, engaged to a man who loved me not despite my background, but because of who I was. As we reached Eleanor's car, a gorgeous luxury vehicle that I ironically knew every specification of, she turned to me with a warm smile. "Welcome to the family, Rebecca. I have a feeling you're going to fit in perfectly." And for the first time in 6 months, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Never let anyone make you feel ashamed of honest work. I went from selling cars to becoming part of the biggest automotive empire in the state. If this story inspired you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to remember their worth isn't defined by their job title. Subscribe for more incredible true stories that prove karma comes in the most unexpected ways. What would you have said to Patricia in that moment? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.